Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. And today we'll be continuing our little journey with this lovely book, Franz Bardon's Initiation into Hermetics. We'll be looking at step 3. So what's interesting in these books is often the introductions to each chapter or to the entire book have very long-lasting instructions in terms of explorations of mind and perspective. So the introduction to step 3 here looks at 4 things. And these 4 things can be allotted to the different elements. And these are prerequisite types of relationships that facilitate healthy growth along the path. So the first is to the fire element, and it is courage. So in order to really explore this stuff, it can take a lot of courage, and not necessarily in the obvious sense. Of course, you have societal norms, and as we engage in this process of freeing ourselves from our habits and our past, and we start to see the world differently, we start to see things with greater truth and clarity, it can make things a little tricky, and you start to realize that how you choose to live your life can actually be your choice. And very often we get bogged down by the views of others, by the impositions of culture, right? Of what the particular cultural group thinks is good or valuable or makes a good person or not a good person or a crazy person or a sane person. And these types of situations, when we break away from them, we have to be courageous enough to be thought of as pretty weird or even a bad person, simply because we are not existing within the blinders of that particular sub-niche or cultural niche or whatever it might be. So this is a natural byproduct of the expanding and opening of the perspective in the mind, the freeing of ourselves from ourselves. So courage, as the path progresses, then we have courage in relation to the practice itself, because every time you practice, if you're really doing it sincerely and honestly, we are changing, and you never know exactly how you're going to change, which is a peculiar type of courage in and of itself, because you don't know what you're going to be when you finish that particular sit, who you're going to be, how you're going to be, what your interests and inclinations might be. This will all change, literally with every sit. So it takes a type of courage to explore this. Now, I had one person mention to me once that courage is could be looked at as love on fire. So the fire element. So this spark and this flame of the pursuit of the unknown, right? If you were to light a torch and walk into a cave, it illuminates the unknown. And this willingness to embrace the unknown is one of the most tremendous types of courage, because it's truly unknown. You have no idea what is going to happen down that road and down this path. And one of the biggest things that holds practitioners back in any system is the lack of willingness to step into the space of a question mark and exist from the space of the unknown, because the habits of the identity are normally so strong that we're always looking for different pillars to lean our identity up against to support our sense of self. And there is a very interesting type of courage in having as minimal pillars as possible upon which we rest our identity. So the identity itself is in this free fall of flux and change. And this allows for us to act in a different type of synchronicity as we start working with higher and higher frequencies, and in this particular case, magic and spiritual exploration. So that is courage to the fire element, and a profoundly important aspect of the path that we have to explore, and we will come into resonance with this at different layers as we progress. The next is to the air element, and this is knowledge, right? You could look at knowledge and wisdom, right? I find wisdom is a little bit preferential as it relates to experience, practical experience, knowledge across time. So both of these to the air element. Now, any progression requires a cultivation of knowledge. And you can look at knowledge and wisdom as well. Any type of learning requires differentiation or discernment, which is, once again, to the air element. The ability to see between two things. The air element being that flux between fire and water, or electric and magnetic. The ability to ride the poles and to actually perceive with some type of clarity. Right? So this is, once again, to the air element. And we need to be able to explore different topics of knowledge and start to differentiate. So learning, we could say, is the ability to differentiate more and more and more and more things from themselves and from other things. So the example I like to use is, let's say we had a white piece of paper, and I asked you to, without making reference to the edges or the corners of the paper, and without making reference to anything in the room, in the environment, or myself, to tell me where exactly to place a dot on that piece of paper. It would be very difficult because there's no points of reference. But if we drew a dot in the center of that piece of paper, and then we asked the same question, you could now make reference to that dot in the center of the piece of paper. So you could say, hey, place another dot 2 centimeters above the first, 2 centimeters below. And you could start to then exploring and differentiating more and more and more precisely the location on the paper. So this applies to any type of learning. We learn with a singular point of differentiation, say the air element, as we start working with the energy of that. And then over time, that energy, that frequency starts to open up, and we start to perceive more and more and more of what it can be, right? Same with a posture, right? Let's say holding an asana, like we looked at in step 2. It starts with you're just sitting there, and the whole asana is one thing. And then it starts to break down more and more and more and more. And the millions and millions of minutiae, little bits of the body and the mind and the emotions start to become apparent to our awareness. And that singular posture, even though it might look the same from the outside, becomes an infinite exploration as we break into greater depths of differentiation. So the exploration of knowledge across time, which allows for wisdom to develop, and through this wisdom, a byproduct of that is differentiation. So this really gives us a platform of growth and allows once again for a perspective of mind to continue to evolve, because we start to realize that our awareness is always growing, that something new always opens up to us, some more refined relationship to what it is that we are exploring. And this, once we encounter this again and again and again, and once we've encountered our own, limited understanding where we think to ourselves, oh, I got this, I understand this 100%. There's a point where we've had that experience so many times where we think we have something down and then it opens up to us in a whole new way. This leads to an expansiveness of mind, and as we mentioned with the fire element, with courage, a willingness to embrace the unknown, because it is very difficult to remain open to new things when we need to stabilize our identity on the known, right? And many people, this is where knowledge becomes tricky, is because many folks will learn through the intellect and then attach to the knowledge with the identity, and then lean against that and dig in to support and protect that part of their identity that is attached to that piece of knowledge. Okay, and this inhibits growth, right? And that knowledge will then be used to essentially denounce or talk shit on people who aren't privy to that particular piece of knowledge at this time. So we will think that we are better because we have a certain piece of knowledge. So we need to get over that, and differentiation, the ever-evolving relationship with discernment and differentiation, becomes absolutely paramount with this path. And this brings us into our next little of our four elements here in relation to this introduction to the third step, which is the water element. This is to volition. Now, volition we can look at as the impetus behind everything that we're doing, right? And he has his own particular take on volition, Franz Bardon. Now, if we look at volition as the cohesive substance, right, through which we attach to anything and act it out, there's a type of attachment, right? And this is how we do anything, right? And the volition with which we undertake this work becomes very, very important. Not only to the good or harm that we might do to ourselves and the world around us with this work, but also to the potential, our own potential for this work, our own power. Let me flip the light on here. Our own, that made no difference. Our own power with what we can do, and the through path through which what we do can take. So volition is very, very, very important. And this is where you go through your black and white mirror in relation to your motivations for working on this path. And this is an evolving process, right? As the relinquishment, the dissolution of self keeps evolving, as we resonate with more and more refined frequencies, so as the alchemical potential increases, this all changes. So we need to be okay with where we're at right now. And if we try to be here, when we are resonating here, then we create delusion and we essentially create blockages for ourselves, because we are trying to act in a way that we aren't in resonance with, in the hopes that we will become in resonance with that, which means there's big encasings and blockages, and this can create damage, okay, because we are essentially lying to ourselves. And this creates, it's a cohesive, like, hard shell, essentially, that's difficult to break free from, right? We're essentially creating ego through trying to act from a different plane. So that's important to remember. Volition. Why are we doing what we're doing? So look into this for yourself and explore it, especially when you start doing the Hermetic type work. It's a lot of people engage with Hermetics from a desire for power, a desire to manipulate the world around them to suit themselves. And this is done from a lower egoistic type of standpoint. As the evolution increases, then the volition changes to one of what we could say like resonance or unification with a grander through path and goodwill as we connect and merge with the environment at greater and greater sort of fractals of identity. So this becomes very, very important. So think about it, have a good, sincere look at yourself. Where are you at? What are your motivations for your training on this path right now? This brings us into the earth element of this particular introduction, which is to stillness, to silence. And Bardon, he looks at this in relation to the speaking about what you're doing, the speaking about your knowledge, and observing silence, as opposed to this compulsion to speak about what we're doing all the time. And so we've all had the experience, whether it's observing ourselves doing this or someone else who's just started something new and is super into it. Maybe they just started a meditation practice or a yoga practice. Maybe you just started a new diet and you're feeling amazing and whatever it is, and you can't stop talking about how amazing this new thing is in your life, the novelty of it, the great experience you're having with it, how much it's helping you. And anyone who you see, anyone who you meet, oh, I just started this thing, it's amazing, I love it, oh, you should do it, right? And then you start trying to impose this great thing for you onto other people, and you're listening going, yeah, okay, great, I'm glad you're happy. So observing silence. What is the value and benefit in observing silence? Well, there's quite a few. So in the first steps, it's just maybe developing a deep enough relationship with what it is that you're doing, that when you do speak about it, you actually have a reservoir of experience and authority is the wrong word, but experience with it. There's a type of depth to the words that you might say, right? And that you don't necessarily degrade your own practice and your own relationship with what you're doing by sharing it with people who don't care about what you're saying. What is the point in that? And this can diminish the power of your own exploration. So when people are training with me, I often encourage, after doing, say, a workshop or something with me, that people, like most people are training with other teachers when they come and train with me. They're training with other teachers, they're doing different systems of work, and they're exploring something new with what we do. And so I often encourage people like, hey, maybe before you take what we learned and you start sharing it with whoever your current teacher is, or with people who've been on the path for decades, maybe take some time and really let it build. Let your relationship with what we're doing build so that your skill speaks for itself, to the point where someone will ask you what it is that you're doing. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that most teachers really like to talk, right? And like to place themselves in between the student and the student's growth, because that gives the teacher personality, we might say, value. Okay? And people become teachers for many different reasons. And just like people become healers for many different reasons. One of the main reasons, and again, it's a stage people go through, hopefully they move through it, is that we're looking for value from others. How do I have value to this community? And if I can put myself as a gatekeeper between someone, a person, and their growth, then that makes me a necessity. So in order to free the student into exploring what we've worked on with ease and with essentially like good-natured freedom, I encourage this type of silence so that if the various teachers or friends or whatever that are part of this person's path are in a space where they need to try to degrade what someone is doing, what training someone is doing, what they're exploring, with it being right or wrong within their own path and minds, then it can very much inhibit the person's growth with the material that we've covered, because they'll be looking through someone else's lens, someone who they may have subconsciously given over a lot of their autonomy and sovereignty to. Because that's a natural part of the growth process, the student-teacher exploration, is that if we want to learn a lot from somebody, we tend to open ourselves up very, very fully, so that we can sort of absorb as much as possible. So it's a natural byproduct of that. So we want to be careful for that reason. Now, also, when it comes to silence, we mentioned, of course, our own respect for what we're doing, and interest and excitement and joy, and sustaining that without other opinions getting in the way. And then we continue on to, okay, how do you have the most value when you're exploring this stuff? When you're doing your work, can you go to, say, someone else's class and not mention anything about what you do, and through your own embodiment, which is not a term I like to use too much because it can sort of, it's been co-opted by, back to the body and this obsessive form-based version of the body. But if you have really built resonance with the quality of the training, and you go somewhere, you bring that with you, and the depth of your own training can permeate a room and everybody in the room. Now, of course, this can be done more consciously, but I find that having built it into your mental systems, center, bodies, field, your astral center, body, field, the vital physical center, body, and field, having built these qualities into it over time with the depth of your training, it permeates out. And sometimes, in the absence of speaking about something, we are actually far more effective. I've had surprising and tremendous, weird, we might call successes, through not mentioning anything, through just the quality of the perspective. Non-judgment. One example I'll give from many, many years ago. I was working at a climbing gym, and I went out to a bar when I got off with a woman after, and she got a beer, and I wasn't consuming any alcohol at that time, and so I just got a tea, and we hung out, and then maybe 3-4 months later, she came up to me, we were chatting again, and she's like, "Hey, I actually quit drinking." I was like, "Why?" She's like, "Oh, because of that night when we went out to the bar." I was like, "Why?" We didn't have a conversation about not drinking at all. There was no conversation about it. So I was like, "Oh, that's strange. What about the experience prompted you to quit drinking for a time?" And she said, "Well, because I didn't order any alcohol, and I didn't talk about it. I didn't judge her for ordering alcohol. It literally wasn't a thought in my head. I'd like to say that it was like some grander plan, but it wasn't. There was simply no judgment and a free choice on my part to go to a bar and not do what the culture of bars typically demand you do, which is order alcohol. Back to the fire element and courage, if that's what you need for that." So anyway, just that experience itself allowed the opportunity for this woman to very comfortably explore not drinking. And because it wasn't something that I pressurized with, making her apply her will and all this stuff, it was very easy. She could just do it. So just as one example of how silence can actually be incredibly beneficial. Sometimes the greatest healing that we can offer people is simply through being quiet, without judgment, and listening. So keep this in mind, because this applies to ourselves as we progress on this path. Being silent, can we explore the path and the training without judging ourselves through the lens of others or through the lens of ourselves? To be free from ourselves through non-judgment, this is important. What if the next stage of what we need to explore is something, this has happened a million times to me, where it's something that I've made fun of for years on the spiritual path, and it's like the thing that I have to explore next. So if I judge that particular spectrum of the magical path, that particular pursuit of exploration and knowledge, then I can't explore it. If I judge myself for engaging in this new path, then I can't do it. So non-judgment, right? Silence. What are all of the ways in which we are constantly talking to ourselves and inhibiting ourselves from growth, right? There's a lot. I mean, this is just a beginning, an introduction to the potential potency and positive ramifications of what silence can offer. Okay, so deep exploration and deep potential in these foundations. Moving on now, we will look at the step, 3, mental training. Okay, so this is the schooling of the spirit, and this is a further exploration in this step, right? Once again, great book, Franz Bardon's Initiation to Hermetics. This is a step about the concentration and sensory fabrication, essentially. So visualization of all of the sense gates. Now, in this step, Franz Bardon adds in multiple sense gates working at once. Okay, so looking at, can you visualize and vision both, say, the visual and the auditory? So the example he gives, can you see like a grandfather clock and the pendulum swinging, and can you hear the ticking at the same time? Can you create this particular scene in your mind, okay, in your mind's eye? And so you work the 2 sense gates at once. It could be eye and sound, right? Visual and auditory. It could be feeling and sound. Maybe you hear a waterfall and feel it cascading down, or you're further away, you feel the mists and you hear it. Maybe you can work 3 sense gates at once. See it, hear it, feel it. These are the 3 that he recommends working most of. Now, the value in this is that you can start to perceive in more and more subtle relationships to your perceptions changes that might be occurring, right? And this allows, through working the creative process, when you're doing higher level work with invocation, for example, and you're really working with frequencies, you can perceive how they might be altering you, right? This thing that's us, through the different sense gates. So you might get visions that can now come in more easily. You might hear instructions or warnings or whatever it might be more easily, and feel changes more easily because you've built the creative process. So now this type of intelligence has a platform through which to communicate to us. And for those who are opposed to that, you might look at this as a platform. You're cultivating the richness, the detail, the definition of the platform of, say, the subconscious or the superconscious to communicate with the conscious mind and with the conscious awareness as it reticulates through the senses. So the first step is with your eyes closed, or the first part of this exercise is with the eyes closed, right? And then with the eyes open, can you envision through multiple sense gates at once, fully and completely, to the point where everything else disappears? Which, if everything else is disappearing, that means that you probably want to be seated still and maybe not walking around, because you'll be walking into people and trees and stuff. So this is working with basic scenes that we are familiar with, right? And then once we've done this, and we can do this for, he likes to use 5 minutes, but for periods of time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, where you can really be absorbed into an envisioning process, you then start to move to like bigger objects or scenarios, scenes. So can you envision, see it, hear it, feel it, and if you're open to it, smell and taste the environment of, say, your community? Can you see all the houses on your block? Right? Can you see the forest that you usually walk in, the twists and turns of the path, the trees, the rocks, where the streams are? Do you have access to this? Right? And so you work environments that are familiar to you. Okay? And then you start working environments that are not familiar to you. So this is where you get the real creative process coming even more. And there's lots of value in this, because now this allows for the unknown to start moving through. So you can do this from the perspective of manufacturing all of this stuff, and in the beginning you might be manufacturing it quite strongly, where you're deciding upon it, and as time goes on it can be more and more like a dream, in the sense that the unknown presents itself in the envisioning process as you're moving step by step through it. The next stage in this is working with more complex things like animals, things that move. Now, before you get to that, you might look at like the moving of a river, the flow of a waterfall, the waving of trees. That's a little bit simpler. Can you envision that process with multiple sense gates? Hear the wind, hear the branches moving, cutting through the air, right? Hear the rustle of the leaves, feel the wind, smell whatever sense might be coming in. So that's a little easier. Then we get to creatures. So can you envision, say, your dog or your cat or your bird or whatever your creature is that you're familiar with? Can you envision that creature moving? Can you envision it cleaning itself? Can you envision it jumping, moving fast, running, slowly, whatever? All the different situations and ways of moving, the gait, everything as it changes, as speed picks up, all that stuff. Can you envision that? Can you see the flapping of the bird's wings, the call, the sound? Again, all the sense gates working together deeply. You do this with the eyes closed and the eyes open. And then finally you bring this to people, right? First with people that you know. Can you see their face, their eyes, the contours of the cheekbones, the depth, the width of the lips, right? The richness or color of the skin, size of the skin follicles, the color of the hair, the crop of the hair, the etc., 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 the way they move their posture, the way their nervous system holds the body, their particular tendencies and reactivities that are baked into the physiology, all of everything that you can see in a person. Can you bring that to mind with fullness, with richness? Can you hear the sound of their voice? Can you feel their particular touch, if it's a touch of the skin, or the feeling of their presence, the type of mentality and emotion they may bring to a room? All of the sense gates, the scent of a human being. Some people smell a little sick, like they're not well, they smell a little unwell. Some people bring different scents with them. So what is it that you can perceive and that you can recall in as much richness with as many of the sense gates as possible with people that you know. And then with people that you don't know, with the eyes closed, with the eyes open, once again, the unknowns. So where's the value in this beyond the creative and destructive process and beyond the through path for deeper subconscious, we might call it communication, or if you're working at higher spectrums of the spiritual path, the pathways through which higher intelligence might communicate with us. So beyond that, we have not necessarily better, but just and something more, is it really starts to let us know how much do we actually pay attention, right? To what it is that we're seeing, to the people that we're around, to the animals that we see, to the trails that we take, to our neighborhood. How much of this are we actually paying attention to? If we can't call up to our mind what it is, like how a crow looks when it's flying, how many millions, thousands, tens of thousands of crows have you seen flying? How many seagulls have you heard squawking? Can you recall that? If not, where were you? And what is the blockage in awareness that's preventing us from being able to recall these things? If we can't create the image of a dog running through a field and hear the patter of the feet, how many thousands of times have you seen a dog running? So what were you paying attention to? Now, I'm not saying that this is really common, is that we think that certain things are, might be more worthy of attention, or we go, like for example, in like the nature communities, they really pedestalize awareness and awareness of the nature type stuff, especially because that's the interest and the passion. So if you're not aware of that, then your awareness is lesser. But we're always paying attention to something, even if it's vacancy or nothing. There's always something that is the object of attention. And just because it's one thing and not another doesn't devalue that awareness. You might be paying attention to your own thoughts. So why would you be paying attention to that crow squawking around and flying through the air, or the particular shape and scent of those leaves of that particular tree or plant? You haven't needed it. So your attention has been on what you're preoccupied with, which is very often our thoughts or the tribulations of our day. And there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe we're solving problems. That's fine. Finding solutions. That's fine. So, I remember I had a friend once who, I was paying attention to certain aspects of people. She was paying attention to the clothing they were wearing and what that spoke to in terms of their particular mentalities and this, that, and the other thing. And I was looking at gait and posture and, stuff behind a lot of what was going on. And zero attention to anything that had to do with what was being worn. It was just not in my perceptions whatsoever. And it was funny because the stories that we might have about just going and people watching would be entirely different, right? It would seem like two entirely different locations and entirely different groups of people that were being viewed. So it's not better or worse, but let's look at what are we paying attention to? How much awareness do we have? This is a big part of the initial stages in this book, is what is it that you're observing? Again, the arising and cessation of thoughts. What is it that is occupying our perceptions? How much of that are we aware of, right? And then how much choice do we have over that? This comes back to the initial step one mental training, right? That's what it is. What are we aware of, and how much choice do we have over what it is that we choose to pay attention to? So this starts to wake us up to an openness of mind when it comes to, say, the people in our life. What are we imposing on that person? And how much of that person do we actually see? Do we actually hear? Do we actually feel? Do we actually smell? And through exploration of our sensory experience and finding greater openness to what it is that's coming through, we get a natural reduction in egoistic impositions, of imposing somebody's past onto their present, of imposing our own ideas onto who and what a person can be, onto who and what our pet might be, and onto who and what we might be. What do you look like, right? What's all of your postural subtleties, physiological expressions, the sound of your voice, the space between, or lack of space between the words that you speak, right? The movements of your mind, how do those affect the perturbations, the frenetic nature of your body movements, or the slow, sluggish nature of movements as well? Not in a bad way, just what is there? What do you feel, right? How do you feel? How does your touch feel? How does your presence feel to be around, to yourself, to others, right? What are your own scents, your smell, right? What do you smell like? This gives you clues into your own health, right? What do you taste in your mouth? Again, clues into your own health. So a lot of potential here when it comes to exploration of the sense gates and what we can do with them. This is far beyond cultivating, doing a concentration exercise, right? We want to look at all of this beyond the scope of the exercises themselves to what it offers, beyond the empowerment through clarity of focus of magical capabilities and practical uses of meditative states of mind and spiritual consciousness and awareness, okay? So that is step 3, schooling of the spirit or mental training. Now, is there more to this? Yes, there's always more. Okay, but that's enough to get started with for the moment. Moving on now to the soul training in step 3. This is where Franz Bardon begins his introduction to the relationship with the elements themselves in terms of the energy of the elements. Up to this point, it's been suggested that folks work on finding equilibrium and control over emotional tendencies and being able to transform negative to positive qualities. This is really important because as we build the underlying energy behind the manifested shapes and forms of particular emotional tendencies, etc., when that energy is greater, it will then flow into the habitual forms with greater force, pressurizing those habitual forms, which is why equilibrium within each element and of all the elements is so important. So the actual practice involved is relatively simple, which is we essentially pour breathe the relationship with the element into the body. And from there, of course, it will reticulate through the field. So he does this through both focusing on how the element enters from the sphere around us, through the nose, as well as through the skin. So the pour breathing isn't only through the skin, it's the whole body. The use of the imagination here is to imagine oneself in the center of the element, as if that element encompassed the entirety of the universe. So let's say it's the fire element. You would place yourself in the center of the fire element. The whole universe is fire. Everything else disappears. All you perceive is the fire universally. Then you inhale and you draw through the pores and through the nose. You draw that energy in through the body as if the physical and the astral bodies were both, as he describes, hollow. And so they're empty, and then they're being filled with each breath with a stronger relationship to the fire element. Now, he recommends in the beginning 7 breaths, where you're accumulating your relationship with the fire element, and then an equal number of breaths, 7 breaths, where you are dissolving that out of the body. This process of dissolving it out can be very important so that we find harmony and balance once again. As we become more and more familiar with the elements, you can play with this as you like, but for basic balance and health reasons, it can be helpful to expel the energy that we've built up. Now, when we're exploring this process, he then suggests adding a breath every day, and or using a string of beads so you don't have to count it. I've always preferred timers for this sort of thing if we want to impose limitations onto how much of something we're doing. I've always preferred timers because then you don't have to think about it, you don't have to count, you don't have to move beads. There's just a sound that goes off and then you're done. The only issue with the timer is you have to remember that you need the exhausting of the element as well. So this is where you might do 5 minutes working the building of the relationship with the element. Just have an interval timer you can set. It goes off, it automatically starts another 5 minutes where you are relinquishing your relationship with the element. So that's like an easy way to work on it. In terms of the physicality involved, each element has a different type of physiological perception and expression, and not limited to one. That's important. It's very easy in the beginning to limit this to the most obvious. So with fire, of course, there's heat, and the quality of fire can have a constantly expansive type of feeling, and as this energy builds, it can start to pressurize in the body. He's very clear here that we don't strain the breath and strain the lungs. Very, very common when we're using a breathing type of method to work with this stuff is that let's say we want to inhale an energy as we'll breathe in, and then when we go to breathe out, we'll strain and create a bunch of unneeded tension and strain. We want to be as free as possible and allow the energy of the element itself to orchestrate the physiological changes. I find this to be a much more earnest way of cultivating a relationship with the element, as opposed to imposing physical strains onto to manufacture the physical results of the element. There can be value in it from like a triggering type of perspective, but I find working with the elements more purely and observing the shift in the physiology as a result of the understanding of the element. That I find to be a little bit more pure, and it doesn't create as much habitual tensioning within the body, especially within the chest and the throat and the mind. It's very, very common. So however much time you build, use the same amount of time to deplete the energy of the element once again. You go through each element. So fire, of course, heat, expansiveness, and then there's all the emotional type tendencies within each element, positive and negative. This is what we start to look at, what I was referring to in the other steps in regards to the schooling of the soul and emotional tendencies when it comes to the energy beneath. So this is where we start to look at it. And when you look at, say, the air element, then you have the lightness of the air element, the speed, the quickness of the air element, quickness of the mind. The air element is to transition. So there's a lightness that comes with the air. It's air, it's very light. And this can be an initial physiological perception that will start to occur as you resonate more fully with the air element. With the waters, of course, more coldness and cohesiveness with the waters. The one he focuses on within the book is cold, and there's certainly value to that, especially if you live in a cold climate, or a hot climate, I should say. I've found that if you're innately, hot-blooded or innately a little more cold-blooded, it's not of super great value to increase the one that you are that's excessively strong in you. And then of course the earth element to density, heaviness, stillness, gravity. So in terms of really understanding and building this relationship with the elements, spending time with each element in its physicality can be really, really potent, right? So if you want to understand fire, have a little bonfire, right? You can make these, small, just a foot across, 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters, doesn't have to be big. You could light a candle. I find that the burning of a candle has a little bit less of the chaotic qualities in it. It's a more organized type of fire, but still absolutely better than nothing. And it'll help you really tap into some of the essence of the fire element itself. To train the air, find a cliff top, find a windy day, observe points of transition, go to transition areas in a forest. You can go to a river or waterfall where the air rushes, is pulled by the flow of the water. You can go, of course, to those same areas, the waterfalls, the rivers, to understand the water element. Spend time around the water, submerge yourself in a lake, submerge yourself in a river, feel the power of the water. What happens when you sit on the bank of a river? In the cellular structure, these are all about the feeling capacity. For the earth, go find a cave, a deep cave, right? And if you want to feel the density and the stillness of the earth, that's a pretty good place to do it. That power is pretty potent there. So you explore these sensory experiences. Again, this training of the soul is focusing on the feeling element. There's an offering of some colors you can use for, if that helps you with the feeling quality of each element. Red for fire, blue for air, greenish blue, turquoise for water, and he uses yellow or I believe brown or black for the earth, but you could think of maybe, I don't know, he doesn't use brown. Yellow, gray, and black. I like earth and brown for the earth element, but you can also use the yellowish, grayish, blackish nature of, say, stone, like loamy sand, stones as well. So there's a lot there you can play with. Because we're working with the energy, once again, behind the astral, we're also strengthening the astral body itself through this work. The invitation to start with, say, 7 breaths, or maybe 2 minutes or whatever, on each building of and dissolving of the element, is so that we can build the resiliency of the astral body to each element. To begin with an hour at a time can be a lot, and we don't want to exhaust ourselves or burn ourselves out. Just like concentration exercises of the mind and focus can be fatiguing, exercises to do with the astral body and building of the astral energies of the elements in the astral sense can be fatiguing. It requires recovery. A lot of this work is stimulus and recovery. Just like lifting weights, just like working out, you're building your ability to do something. And it's not just the recovery of the body, it's also the energy that it takes to build the scaffolding of the awareness of what we're doing, the scaffolding of the mind that takes us to that place. The myelination of the neuronal pathways takes energy, right? We're creating change. So we need to adapt to it, which is why there's a lot of value in not starting too big. Also, from a motivation standpoint, the the more Herculean we make the appearance of the task in our minds, the harder it can be to decide to do it. So start small, start easy, and allow yourself to build these elements. I find working with the elements, there's no better way to do it than using the actual element itself. Spend time with fire, spend time with water, spend time with earth, the beaches, the sands, the deep caves, the stones, and spend time with the air. And you get to know it all better and better and better. Those are such pure doorways into the nature of the elements as they spin in and out of themselves, and as their qualities, their tendencies, their essences are explored from greater and greater depths and greater expansiveness as you start to explore the universality of the elements themselves. He makes a very clear point here that one of the things that is often neglected in spiritual work is a really deep dive into the elements. Because from my own experience, all of the work that we do at each layer, and this is mentioned in the introduction to this book, at each layer of the vibrational scale, at each moment by moment slide of this scale is an exploration of the elements. In all the layers of life force and vitality, in all the layers of the astral planes and realms, in all the layers of mind, in all the layers through the Akashic light paradigms, planetary work, constellational work, Kabbalistic work is all deeper explorations of the elements, refining your understanding, and the also the understanding of the refined nature of the elements. You're working the alchemical relationships. So really worth putting some time in. Really worth putting some time in. He mentions with each element some of the siddhis that might arise, some of the powers that might arise through working a lot with the elements, and also cautions against not exploring the equilibrium of the elements. So you could work one element for, the suggested time frame, not in this book that I've seen, but the suggested time frame I've heard time and time again is 10 years. If you want to develop like an absolute ownership of the fire element and manifest it into the physical, 10 years. If you hear the stories of people like snapping their fingers and there's a flame, burning there. The suggestion is 10 years. All day, every day, 10 years. Building up your relationship with that element, and you'll build powers with the element. In terms of specific manifestation, as well as weather type magic, say with the air element and storms, water element, the creatures within the element, your ability to tap into that stuff. Bardon does this thing where he often will say that a magician who's on the path will understand such things, and as such he needs to offer no further instruction. And there is certainly truth to this. As you develop, you will understand things more and more. Sometimes the actual instructions themselves for developing particular powers, personally I find a lot of that stuff, it feels like a waste of time. Like, why go after one thing when you can connect with everything and then watch as it expresses through minute moments in time and space? And so then you get the difference between training for specific power expression and the arising of expressions of power through need, which is where you sort of get the expression of miracles as a byproduct of connection and of need, and usually of need beyond self. So that's the astral training for this particular section of the book. This is step 3. All right. We have in step 3 the schooling of the body. Now, this step is a very big step when it comes to understanding life force and understanding the use of vital energy. So as we do this, we begin with what is essentially a body scan in conjunction with building vital energy, right? So let's talk a little bit about life force. The easiest way to explore this is in conjunction with a Qi Gong practice. Now, I don't mean a movement type of Qi Gong practice in the sense of doing like the Bardon Jin and all these movement exercises. I'm referring to more of a Gong type process where you are building energy and building the life force through connecting circuits. So that would be typically in a standing type meditation posture where you're connecting some circuits and really allowing the energy to build. What's nice about this is that over time, if you sustain the posture and the whatever method you're using for connecting the circuits, which for the beginning, when it's physical, it's a lot easier. I stumbled into this accidentally through learning how to connect circuits mentally because no one had, I just hadn't encountered the connection of it physically, which is fairly backwards on the process. But you work into these different methods however you get to them. So anyway, when you start building vital energy, what happens is there starts to become a stretch, a fullness, a pressurization of the tissue of the body as the energy builds. It's like taking a balloon and inflating it with energy. The balloon itself starts to stretch as it expands. And so as we keep filling with vital energy, the body starts to expand, the tissue expands and becomes connected within the presence of the life force. Now, over time, this connection increases and increases, and the body itself adapts to being tuned in a way that produces life force. And these two work hand in hand. Of course, you have numerous different energy strength training methods that will help to build the capabilities of the body to resonate with the life force and allow for more through flow of life force in that way. So when you think of a healthy body, and we're just talking sort of practically around this particular portion of this step of the book, when you think of a healthy body, a healthy person, a healthy mind, healthy emotions, there is resiliency, which means essentially the ability to deform and reform. There is a bouncing back quality. So when we encounter mental setback, it doesn't deform us to the point where we collapse mentally. It deforms, there's an adjustment that takes place, and it reforms. Same with the emotional states. When we encounter emotional turbulence, a sudden event in one way or another, we don't fall apart. It doesn't deform our astral self, our astral body, to such a degree that we can't return. We reform, there's resilience, we rebound. And very much so physically. When you get sick, how quickly do you recover? When you fall, how quickly does the tissue bounce back? Right? Now, if it doesn't bounce back, this is where something breaks. You hit the ground, right? Or let's say, or you're throwing a punch or whatever, there's a deformation and then a reformation. If there isn't a reformation, that is where a bone breaks. If you fall and your hip hits the ground and the bone deforms and continues to deform and doesn't reform, eventually it snaps. So this applies to all the tissue. So through cultivating vital energy, what will happen is we will start to become full and resilient. And this essentially acts as a type of protective chi. This is protection through quantity of life force. So if you are ill, it's very common when people are ill and are lacking in life force that the tissue starts to sag, right, and become quite malleable and quite flaccid, essentially. So if you poke someone's belly or the tissue, you can almost just squeeze right through it. It's very watery. And if you have ever been in that state, I mean, even if you're sleeping, you roll on one side and you don't have the energy, the life force isn't there to support the organs, so they all flop onto one side of the abdomen. You roll over, they flop onto the other side, and it hurts. It's not comfortable. So there's a lot of value from a health standpoint in inflating all of the tissue so all the organs are supported, and through the tissue conducts life force, right? And you can explore this through different functions. So resiliency is very, very important. So back to the exercise here is essentially you build the energy within the legs one at a time, right? And you build it up and then you dissipate it. And you do that with each leg. You do that with, say, each arm, each foot, each hand, each organ. And you start to become acquainted with how if you have a depletion of energy and there's a collapsing in one area or another, you can actually fill that energy with life force and replenish the balance in that area. If there's an area that's frenetic and overactive, you can deplete some of the life force out of that area and rebalance it in with other areas. This is something that, again, I stumbled into accidentally just through long endurance type practices where, I could feel the accumulation of tension and energy in particular areas. And then I would take the mind and I'd load it in to the opposite area, and I would adjust things so that it would draw the energy out of the overinflated area and infuse it into the underinflated area. So not only was I bringing balance to each area, but also the interdependent relationship, we could say, that might be there was harmonized as well. So I found that to be very, very useful. So anyway, through working through each of the individual body parts in relation to the life force, the organs, right from the feet through the head, you can discover a lot of interesting things about life force and about health and about function. So definitely a good exploration. The next exercise of this particular step in the schooling of the body is accumulating life force and accumulating vast amounts of life force. And this is done through, once again, Bardon likes to work through the imagination and the intellect as your doorway in, which there's certainly a lot there and a lot of value to it. In conjunction, once again, with a good Qi Gong practice, a good energy strength building practice, and a good meditative practice in relation to building energy, it can be done a lot faster with connecting circuits and with working the connection of the tissue from the bodily standpoint as well, right? Because that goes hand in hand, once again, with the expressive, expansive quality of the presence of the life force itself that it has on the tissue. So this next exercise, essentially you build the energy in. Every time you inhale, you bring more life force into the body and it expands through the tissue. And when you exhale, you don't dissipate it. You do nothing with it. It just stays in the body, and then each inhalation you're drawing more in. You exhale, keeping the energy in. When you inhale, you draw more in. So each inhalation, you're building the quantity of the life force that's within the body. As you keep building the quantity, that life force starts to permeate beyond the body into the field, and it grows in expansiveness from, just beyond the body to a meter out, 2 meters out, 3 meters out, 10, 12 meters out, until, as he says, it can be radiating miles out. The standard to go for from a magical schooling perspective is about 10, 12 meters out in every direction. The normal, healthy, functioning human has approximately a meter or so of auric life force in radiating out through the field. People who are strongly intellectual and focused, or very work the body a lot, like athletes, have both of those, will have bigger fields because the body's being worked so much, and the focus is present. So this type of vitality and expansive field of vitality is not limited to those who engage in these particular practices. It can be a byproduct of other activities as well. However, when we are focusing specifically on this, of course, what we place our attention on grows. So we will grow this life force capacity. Now, if you have ill health, that poor health will eat up the life force that you are building, that you're accumulating. And sometimes you can, the amount that you accumulate is always being used up because of the poor health. So it can be very difficult to actually accumulate a large expansive field, right? Think of when you're exhausted, there's a collapse, right? As you are filled with energy, your posture picks up and you become more buoyant. So if there's constantly drains on the life force, then you might always be working, just replenishing the tank just enough. And that might take everything that you have to stay at stasis. And stasis is a hell of a lot better than constant depletion. But as the healing starts to occur and those holes in the life force start to be plugged, then we can actually accumulate more and more resonance with the life force and start radiating it to greater and greater degrees. So you build it, you build it, you build it. When you exhale, nothing leaves. You're just continuing to build the life force into the body and then into the field. The type of tension, once again, that fullness, that expansive, inflated quality of the tissue can be a lot, right? It requires, once again, the recovery so that the tissue becomes more capable of sustaining that type of relationship with life force. The nervous system is more capable of being conductive to that life force. And we want to be careful that we don't fry ourselves. That's not a hard thing to do. And it's not something to be proud of, that you fried yourself with energy. I remember burning myself once, like a literal skin burns, and was like, oh, I burnt myself with energy. But, not the best move. So take your time to build up this potency. The suggestion of 7 breaths, building this with each breath, and then 7 breaths on each exhalation, dissipating it. When you inhale, nothing new comes in, you're dissipating it. This can be very valuable to make sure that you discharge the energy. And you can discharge it with particular function as well. So we'll get into that shortly. So once you've done, of course, a number of breaths, then you can work beads or set a timer. Once again, setting the timer is my preference because you don't have to think about it or count or waste your attention on counting or moving beads. So this is the building up of the energy. And Bardon suggests a strong relationship here between life force and the light of life force, where you build up the energy, the life force, to such a degree that you become like a radiant sun. And the sun has so much life force. Think about how it animates trillions of tons of life all over the planet every second. It's just beaming down light, the light of life force. And this is a phenomenal way to explore the life force potential and your own potential radiance as a sun from the perspective of the life force, or the light of life force as well. Okay, so lots of value in this. If you are interested, I have a free hour-long meditation on the homepage of my website. It's right there, just scroll down a little bit, and you can run through that, and it takes you through a somewhat extensive guided exploration of life force as it relates through the mind, through the emotions, through the body, and some other play with it as well. So it's a nice sort of cleansing and invigorating type of meditation, so you're welcome to check that out. Now, what's cool about this is that if you can work that energy and you understand yourself well, you tend to start understanding how the energy works with other people well, because we are the same, we're made of the same stuff, and for the most part we have very, very similar tendencies when it comes to how the life force influences us. Now, of course, there's intricate differences when it comes to particular expressions based off upbringing and habit and, astral tendencies, etc. But there is a lot of interesting stuff that's there that's more or less identical. So in this step after it, there is a little bit of ways in which you can use accumulated life force. So the first portion looks at what he calls impregnating a room, or I would call charging a space. And so this is where you start using the life force and imbuing it with intention. Maybe it would be imbuing a space through the life force with health, or with happiness, or joy, or conviviality, good-natured connection. You can be as complicated with this as the refinement of your intention allows. Bardon uses the word imagination a lot, and a lot of the release type folks have a big aversion to the word imagination, but then will say, oh, I use the mind. And, it's just, how you parse apart this stuff. You refine the use of the imagination, and it becomes something that is very real. For some reason, there's a certain type of practicer that demonizes mental energy and pedestalizes other energy, the energies of the feeling gate, but we'll demonize the visual gate. So all of these gates can be used with a lot of success and with a lot of freedom and a lot of liberation, as well as with confinement and choice and specificity. So we want to retain an open mind as best we can. Now, charging up a room, charging up a space, it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it, right? And same with amulets, is he mentions as well, charging up amulets and imbuing an amulet with life force, and then giving it an intention. Maybe it is of health or of protection or of goodwill. These are things people can carry around them, and it will alter their field to the specifics of that amulet. Now, you can be quite specific when you're charging this type of stuff up in terms of it being only for that individual person and having no effect on other people, or having it be sort of permanent, that it just affects everybody. This is the introduction to enchanting objects and amulets and religious artifacts, etc. There's all kinds of really cool stuff you can do here. So this is where you start to be introduced to it from the perspective of the life force. When we are doing this, there's, you get better at it. There's a degree of skill involved, and usage of mental space and the collapsing of the mental space into or expanding it, how could we say it? The occupying of the space in which we want to charge with the mind, essentially. And this is where the energy will go, right? The energy goes where the attention is, or flows, or whatever that saying is. So if your mind is on the space of the amulet or on the space of the room, and you build that energy in with an intention, it will start to go there. There's some instruction here in terms of applying time constraints and space constraints. Maybe you want to have the space of 2 meters around a sacred object that you have. Maybe you have an altar set up in the corner of your room, and you want that corner to be imbued with that sacred energy and whatever you're working with there, but you want to be able to do normal people stuff somewhere else in the room. You can apply a certain space or a certain time constraint where the enchantment, we could say, dissolves after a certain period of time, or once its task is complete, etc., etc. So lots of options here. And again, if we have a type of aversion to this type of talk, we want to employ the use of that if shelf that is filled with if books, that resides in the if attic, that is at the top of the if house on the if block of the if community of the if nation, etc., etc. Really allow for the unknown to remain unknown and to not demonize it or block it off as impossible, right? This is a tension of the mind and a type of identity stabilization that is requiring imposing knowns. So allow for the unknown. It's an unknown until it's a known. You don't need to impose a possible or impossible onto it at this point in time. Allow for that understanding to arise on its own. So we then get into healing potentials, and he offers up some healing techniques, essentially. And when you're working with healing others with vital energy, we always want to be careful that we're not depleting ourselves. So making sure you have strong reserves of vital energy and that you can build quickly a big vital sphere, a big vital field is important, and you radiate that vital light. And then people who just come into your presence will be stimulated back to wakefulness, good feeling, and health, if that is what you imbue into your own field. So what you build into your field matters. And you can read through this section because he talks about a number of different methods. What tends to happen when you are familiar with energy and it's part of your waking consciousness all the time is that a lot of these specific techniques stop really mattering because you're working with the energy itself. You can, if someone has a headache, I just did this the other day. It takes a minute. You tap the energy, you open up the pressure of the area, you reduce the impingements that are constraining the energy, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to go through all of this specific techniques. You feel the energy, you perceive what's happening with the energy, and you make the appropriate alterations to the energy. This has to be done with goodwill, and it has to be done with actual desire for the good of the person that you're working on. It's very common, and I have to mention this, it's very, very common that healers work from a perspective of seeking to validate their own value through the patient they're working on. And there's a lot of damage that can be done. When a healer takes pride in a patient's, in being able to look at a patient and tell them what's wrong with them, this gets into some real dark territory very quick. Because most people, if you can see into them and then you tell them what you see, they go, oh my God, this person can see so much, they have special powers, and they give over their autonomy to the practitioner, which can be fine if the practitioner is looking for the health of the individual. But most practitioners, if they take pride in seeing the sickness, they will see the patient as sick, not as healthy. And they will impose a shape of ill harmony, of disharmony, onto the patient. And if you are weak and someone with more energy views you for your sickness, they make you worse. So be aware of that. If you are going to energy healers or if you are one yourself, to actually see the patient's health, right? And Bardon's very clear about seeing the patient returning to health. Hour by hour, day by day, they get healthier and healthier. And he offers, once again, a number of different ways of exploring techniques so that the energy comes in universally or sustains them. Once it's depleted, it returns automatically. There's ways that you can build this stuff in. And also, so that you don't have to necessarily be around that person and work on them every single day. However, if it's a complicated case, you might have to do that. So anyway, read through that book and really build your relationship with the vital energy. You can find the techniques once again as he describes them in this particular section. So when we build our relationship with the vital energy and our understanding of magnetism, what he calls biomagnetism, using the life force, both the stimulating and the organizing effects when it comes to healing or really anything else. The techniques are just something for the mind to attach to in the beginning. But as you become at one with the energy, you work with it the same way you might, like, I might reach out and lift up this cup and place it back down. I don't think about imagining a string pulling my hand out to the cup and then imagining a helium-infused balloon that's rising, that raises the cup, and then it loses its, helium and the cup starts to go down. You just reach out and do the thing. And so as you become familiar with the energy, you just work with the energy. And of course, over time, you'll make mistakes and you'll course correct. And we want to do our best not to deplete ourselves, which is why the ability to build vast amounts of vital energy quickly can be of great value. And for your health in particular, if you want to work out or something, sometimes I'll spend a few hours really building vital energy and then just like crazy workouts, right? Come after that, because you just got so much stuff. And then you might think that that's just what you can do. But if you don't build up the vital energy, you might take your output and reduce it by like 90%. So you start to see what works for you, okay? And one way to really help with this is to charge up an amulet with the skill and presence and power of vital energy itself. Maybe a quartz or lapis, those are two of my favorites. And then every time you work with the energy, you wear that amulet. At the end of that session, you load it into that amulet. And this will help you tap into the energy crazy fast. And you'll really be able to sort of hit the ground running with it. Okay, that's the end of step 3 of Franz Bardon's Upside Down book, Initiation into Hermetics. I hope you enjoyed this, found it helpful. If you're interested in training with me, I offer private, elite private coaching sessions online. And I know I have students around the world, so we got to sort out time zones and availability. And then there are the online pre-recorded courses, as well as what I call the Zenden, which is a Q&A reference library. So for students who are enrolled to the courses, any questions you have, if you want more detailed answers and training approaches and exercises specifically, those will appear there, and answers to any specific individual questions appear there as well. On the YouTubes, I tend to be a little bit more general. And then finally, I have a retreat coming up. If you're interested in in-person training, I have a 16-day retreat coming up in June 2025. This is in British Columbia, Canada, and we'll be looking at a whole host of spiritual attunements, initiations, to help bring us into resonance with more and more refined light substance. There's a bunch of fun exercises and exploration of life force, astral exploration, psychic self-defense, Qi dancing, invocation, and the beginnings of planetary work that we'll be doing all kinds of really fun stuff. So if you're interested in that, details are on the website, and you can hit me up if you have any questions. All right, thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye.